I'm Andrew Hall, and this is Dead Hand Radio. My guest for this episode is Jazz Shaw. Jazz is a journalist, editor, writer for Salem Media, Hot Air, The Debrief, and UAP Research. He regularly makes appearances on podcasts and radio shows, and is a regular contributor to the Unidentified Celebrity Review with Luis Jimenez on YouTube. Jazz and I met through our mutual connections on Twitter and our shared interest in UFOs. I've since learned that Jazz served in the Navy and is an experiencer himself. He's also a pretty funny dude and has a ton of knowledge about the topics that we're going to discuss tonight. The Cold War, UFOs, and nukes. Welcome to Dead End Radio, Jazz.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I don't know about the funny dude part. My wife might disagree with that because I always think I'm funny, but I get corrected on that quite a bit. But thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here, man. It's a pleasure, and it's an honor, actually. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
So I know there's a lot going on within the UFO community. It's really big news. It's probably the hottest news on Twitter right now. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but this is really just for you and I to get to know each other. And because I'm a big enthusiast about the Cold War and nuclear weapons. And you, as a child of the Cold War, what part of the country did you grow up, and how was it living under the threat of nuclear war?
For me, until I went into the military, I got to be honest with you, we were kind of shielded from that. I grew up in an upstate region in New York State that was far away from any of the major cities and military bases that people were worried if there was a first strike. So we were in farm country. I grew up in a military family. You know, my dad was a war hero. You know, he got the Purple Heart serving in Patton's army in World War II. And he partook in the actual invasion of Berlin, you know, at the end. And so I grew up with a strong military background, and we knew about the Cold War. It was going on when I was a child, obviously, but I don't think we were as affected as people who lived in some of the areas that would have been considered more major targets. There weren't a lot of people in our area that were out, you know, like digging bomb shelters and, you know, putting in survival shelters and things like that. It was farm country. You know, we were living with, you know, like cows and horses and pigs and stuff. And it wasn't as big of a deal for us, I think, as it was for a lot of other people.
Interesting. Well, we got a couple of people in the chat who decided to drop by. Julie, well, I can't pronounce her last name. Julie, thanks for being here. And Scott Brown and Michael Mataluni dropped by a little bit earlier. But thank you guys for being
believe
here.
it's pronounced Mika.
Mika? Oh, Mike.
Mika Mataluni.
Mike.
Yes.
Yeah. Mika Mataluni. And Lois, I guess I pronounced his name earlier. Mispronounced his name too.
That's a private inside joke between us. Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
It's not even funny, really.
So you did serve in the military, but when you decided to go into the military, how old were you, and what was the catalyst for that?
The dual catalyst for that, I would say, was the fact that we grew up very poor. You know, it's a great life living in farm country. It's a wonderful way to grow up when you're a kid, and you get to play, and there's a lot of hard work, but there's not a lot of cash money. It was not a real cash subsistence thing. Only one of four kids in my generation had the ability to go to college, because back then there weren't a lot of financing options. That was part of it. The other part of it was that most of the men, one of my brothers did not serve in the military, but other than that, everybody, all the men back then, because it wasn't such a big thing for women back then, everybody went into the military. Everybody served. Our family was in service. Um, Everybody served in the military. Several of them went into law enforcement after they got out of the military. If you grew up in my family, it's like if you were a boy, that's what you did, you know. And that was sort of my pre-aligned future when I was growing up. It's like when I finished high school, you know, studying courses that would help you for the school you wanted to get in military school. In my case, that was electronics technology. Um, and that's what you did. And I went and served, and I did a 6-year stint. And that's pretty much what everybody did. My dad went in. He didn't know how long he would be there. He was there till the war was over. But he lied about his age. And my dad went to Europe when he was 16 and a half years old. And my grandfather signed papers saying he was 18, you know, and he went and
Yeah.
fought in Benton's army. You know, it's like, I understand that's foreign to a lot of people, particularly in the modern era. But back then, that's what you did.
Yeah, those were different times for sure. And
They
especially
were.
during World War II, people were so uh, against what was happening in Europe. And then when Pearl Harbor was bombed, everybody wanted to go. I mean,
Right.
instantly, it was a totally different era. But your era as well, people were. What were the years that you served? Just to give me a
1977 and 1983.
okay. So post Vietnam, post
Yep.
obviously post Korea, but
I don't
so
want to give anybody listening the impression that I was a war hero or that I was involved in, you know, the Battle of the Bulge or anything like that. I was in during the Cold War, but it was the Cold War. It was largely peacetime. We got into a few nasty scrapes with Soviet vessels out at sea a few times on Westpac tours, Western Pacific tours. But it was always just close calls and things. We weren't involved in any battles. I was not a war hero. I was a radar technician. I took care of radar systems and sometimes communication systems. And I worked all my time was spent in like equipment rooms and combat information center and standing watch and things like that. But I was no war hero. I'm just some guy that signed up and served, and I was one of the drones out there during the Cold War. So
there were plenty of them, and I was one as well from '85 to '89. You know, it was the Cold War. There was
oh,
not
you're a
really a lot
little
to
ways
do.
behind me. Yeah.
Yeah, a little ways behind you. Um, but like you said, man, it was mostly boring. The duty was mostly boring. Um, and but so what kind of a ship were you on? And did you spend most of your time out at sea, or did you guys were you guys
Yeah.
land based?
Once I finished school, I went to Great Lakes for boot camp and for A school and C school. And after that, I served on 2 ships. One of them was a World War II class reserve destroyer out of New Orleans that I was on while I was waiting for TAD orders for a permanent station. And it was the William C. Law out of New Orleans. And we went and did some cruises in the Caribbean, and then one trip up the East Coast and down through Canada and into the Great Lakes for a recruiting tour. But then I got transferred uh, to my requested station, which was out in San Diego. And I went and I served on primarily one aircraft carrier, the Constellation, which is now Razor Blades, CV-64. And I did some TAD work on 2 other carriers, the Ranger and the Kitty Hawk. And that was mostly all Western Pacific deployments. And I didn't know it at the time, of course, because it hadn't happened yet. But once I got out there and we got sent out, a huge amount of our time was spent circling Iran because we were out there during the Iran hostage crisis. And we were taking a huge Marine detachment, huge load of Marines and helicopters circling, waiting for orders to go in and rescue the hostages under Jimmy Carter, orders which never came. And we just spent 2.5 years circling out there, waiting. And
Did that
that was a
hostage
lot of it.
crisis last the whole 2 years, 2.5 years? Was that really how long it lasted?
Well, it was ramping up in the beginning, but the hostage crisis actually lasted for the better part of 2 years. I'd have to
Wow.
go check. It was a long time. We were rotating in and out with 4 other carrier groups, and everybody had their own system of other ships that went with them. And we were just rotating back and forth in and out, waiting for the orders. And there was one sort of fragmented order where we lost a couple choppers and stuff, but our orders never came, and but yeah, it was a long time. I forget how many days it was. It was definitely well over a year. Somebody can go look that up. It was a long time ago. I'm getting old.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were out there forever, and we were replacing each other. I still have a patch that we were given because our carrier at one point set the record for the longest amount of time that a surface ship in the U.S. Navy had ever spent without touching land. It was 133 days straight without
Wow.
touching land. And we were, that whole time, we were out there at a place that was called Gonzo Station, which was an acronym for the Gulf of Oman Naval Military Zone. And it was the middle of nowhere. You couldn't even see land. And you just circled and ran flight ops constantly, practicing, waiting to see if the order would come, if we were going to go in and get the hostages. And the order never came. And we just circled on Gonzo Station forever. And I'll tell you, it's not one of my fonder memories in life.
Is that where did you guys dock when you did touch land during that 2 years?
There's a few places. We went to Pattaya Beach, Thailand.
Okay.
We got to go to Singapore. One time we went down and went to Perth, Australia. The most common port, if you had any work to do, we would go to the Philippines. And I spent a lot of time in the Philippines when we weren't out on station. And the rest of the time you were cycling back and going back home. And we were in San Diego and doing, just training cruises around the Pacific off the southwest coast.
Yeah. So there were some pretty high tensions during certain times. Were you ever affected during your service? The tensions I'm talking about are between the Soviet Union and the U.S. There were some moments there where it looked like it was going to be a little bit could be a little close to launching some nukes. But you know, did you ever experience any of that, or were you just
Oh
as
man,
young
how long
kids
is
just think
this
nothing of it?
show? How
Why?
long is
Oh,
this
okay,
show?
okay. It's
I
well, I
mean,
mean, how much time do
we
you
were
have is really what the
we
question
were
is.
running up against the Soviets all the time.
Yeah.
Every time any carrier group was out there, the Soviets had, let me do the air quote thing, fishing boats
Hmm.
following us. And the fishing boats never seemed to cast any nets or do anything, but they had a remarkable number of antennas on them. And they were constantly following our groups. And we used to have sparring matches with them. That happened on a regular basis. One of my favorite ones, I'll tell you without taking up the whole show, is that there was one particular fishing boat that was following us when we were in between the Philippines and heading over to Gonzo. And on a particular day, it came in, it was heavily overcast. And usually they would lay back 5, 7 miles. And one of them pulled up within just about a mile. And suddenly we had unexpected orders that were not on the duty roster for the day. And they launched the Ready fighters. And if people who aren't familiar, a carrier always has 2 fighter jets that are the Ready fighters. Peacetime, wartime, day, night. There's 2 fighters that are sitting out there with pilots in them. Back then it was Tomcats, F-14s, in full gear, ready to go. At a given moment, if the air boss says launch the Ready fighters, in 45 seconds you will have 2 jets in the air. And we were just sitting there on a cruise, and this fishing boat got really close, and suddenly the call came to launch the ready fighters, and these guys took off. And as I said, it was a low cloud cover overcast day. And out of nowhere, nobody was even ready, but we went to battle stations and they launched it. And they went up and they just took off. And we're always doing flight ops. Nobody really notices. And they went up above the cloud cover and the fishing boat's watching us. And a little while later, I don't know how long it was, one of the jets comes down, breaks the cloud cover. Everybody gives the signal, comes in, lands on the carrier. Where's the other one? Out of nowhere, doing almost a flat spin, our other Tomcat comes down on top of the Soviet fishing boat and drops down within like 100 feet of it. And then to stop itself from crashing, fires the afterburners and takes off and just blasted flames across them. And we literally saw guys on the Soviet ship jumping over the side.
Oh,
And
wow.
the plane went out, circled around, came back and landed. And then the fishing boat backed off to about 7 miles. So
Yeah.
that was just one example of, yeah, we got into scraps. Everybody got into scraps back then.
Yeah.
And the Soviets and the Americans were always just getting into this tug of war pushing match. Nobody died, you know, nobody got sunk or anything of that effect.
Unless one of those fishermen got eaten by a shark, right?
Well, maybe. I have no idea, but it didn't turn into a war thing. But yeah, they were always playing games. The games that were played by the subs between the Americans and the Soviets back then, those were way more serious because they're not in contact with home base. They're just all on their own, But the surface ships, it was games like that. That was games to us.
That's interesting. We could talk about that stuff all night, but I know you got limited time, so I'll move along. But I did want to make one
You
point.
asked.
What's that?
You asked.
Oh yeah, no, hey man, it's interesting to me. Um, the fishing boats, as you called them, those were the drones of the day, right? I mean, nowadays the
Yeah.
Soviets send drones out to buzz our ships, spy on us, and see what's going on. But back then, that was the best they could do was those fishing boats.
Yeah, they tracked your movement. There was communications going back and forth, but you have to remember, unlike today, when there's a fleet of satellites above and everything's encrypted, back then communication was a lot more primitive by comparison, although it was the best anybody had. And we had communications rarely with the shore a lot of the time, and we had UHF radio sets that tried to use very primitive encryption to send messages back and forth and things like that. But mostly our communications, if you were a regular sailor, you were waiting for the mail plane to arrive, and it was all just letters going back and forth. So nobody was out there with cell phones, and communicating and doing things like that. So it was a very different era, and both of our governments had to collect their data in far more primitive ways, and it was a lot more challenging.
It was all analog back then too.
Yeah.
So, but the times were different times. But if you're like me and you love history, that period of time was just almost like a golden age of where everything was in transition all the time. Um, but okay, so did you ever serve on a? I mean, did you ever go on a submarine? You mentioned submarines, but were you ever on a submarine?
I never served on a submarine. I was never deployed as a sailor on a submarine. The first part of my career before I went into writing and everything, when I get out, I worked for a contractor doing technical writing and services in a couple of shipyards in Seattle and Philadelphia. And I did get to go on one submarine, and I'm not going to name the name of it because you're not supposed to talk about submarines, because we did some refit work there. But
Okay.
no, I never served on a submarine.
Oh, okay, cool. And what was your favorite or your most memorable favorite memory from your time in the military? What was the favorite your best memory or the favorite thing that you got to do while you were in
Wow,
the military?
that's tough. I enjoyed and didn't enjoy all of it. It's not easy being in the military people glamorize it and glorify it, but it's a hard life and it doesn't pay squat. I think I would probably say my time that I spent, and I mentioned this earlier, my time that I spent in New Orleans and when I went on a recruiting tour on a destroyer, aside from when we ran into a hurricane in the North Atlantic and everybody was almost killed, we went and did a tour of the Great Lakes. It was a recruiting tour, and that's what the destroyer was used for because it was getting close to retirement. Um, and we went through and got to stop and visit a lot of towns and get sent out. Nobody was allowed to go out in civilian clothes. You always had to wear a uniform. And we went out and got to meet people and talk to them about the military, and particularly trying to meet young people and just say, you know, do you have an interest in military career? And unlike my actual Cold War service, over there that we were just talking about, I think that was the most fun because you were just reaching out to people and it was a totally non-confrontational, non-war atmosphere. Whereas when you were on Westpac, if you were out at Gonzo Station, you didn't know if at any moment it was going to go hot, if it was just going to go to complete FU, end of the world bullshit, you know. But I really enjoyed that recruiting tour because I went out and met so many families and so many guys that had served before, and they would bring their sons along because back then there wasn't a lot of women going in, and they'd be like, hey, meet this guy, and you were always out in uniform, and you'd talk to them about the military and your experience and what was important about it to you. And they signed up a lot of recruits back then, and of course you weren't constantly threatened with being nuked. So I think that was my favorite thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure that some of the friendships that you made during your time in service are still lasting to this day. I know that
Yep.
I have friends that I served with. I'm still friends with.
That
Um,
lasts forever. Yes.
yeah, it certainly does. When you go through go through tough times of high stress, you just build that brotherhood or that that brother sisterhood, whatever, um, and you never forget those people. So it looks like we got a few more people in here. If you guys have any questions for Jazz, feel free to drop them in the chat. But Star Alley says, "Love a man in uniform. It's hot." That is true. I won't disagree with that. That's a good point. Um, and Julie she said she had to take off for the night, I guess. And we also got Shawnee 002. And I probably Thomas Fessler. Thank you guys all for being here. Very much appreciate you guys showing up. But please drop those questions, comments into the chat. Now, I, in our conversations, you have mentioned that you have worked around nukes or you've worked with nukes. Are you talking about nuclear power plants or nuclear missiles?
I've never served. I never served on a nuclear ship because of weird situations. I did go to nuclear power school in Orlando, Florida, in anticipation that I might be needed on a nuclear ship and have, a reactor duty. I wound up going to a conventional power ship. So I did learn about that. Um, wow. Even after all these years, I'm watching what I'm going to say next.
Yeah.
I will say that the theoretical possibility exists that I could not confirm that our ship during that period, particularly in a stressful Cold War period, that was loaded up with a bunch of fighter planes and bombers, the possibility exists that there were nuclear weapons on board, but we can neither confirm nor deny that.
Right.
That's really all I can say about that.
What is it about nukes? I mean, they obviously scale down the number of nukes, but for people who don't understand, at the peak of the Cold War, I think it was at the peak of nuclear proliferation, let's put it that way, there were 70,000 nukes in the world. I don't know what it's down to now, but it's less than half of that. It's probably in the 20,000 range at this time. But what is it about nuclear weapons that is so scary? It freaks people out. Most people might already know that, but from a person who's actually worked around nukes, what's the scariest thing about nukes that you would say?
That's a hard question to even grasp, Andrew. I mean, it really is. I mean, they're nukes.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you could sit there and say, if I'm looking at this as a rational actor, well, getting hit by any bomb is scary if you're the guy the bomb falls on, or if it's like next door to you. If you have a nuclear bomb like the ones that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, well, you could be 15 miles away and you're still dead. Nobody's ever been hit with a hydrogen bomb in anger.
That's a good point.
If you were, well, that range extends a lot further. And then there's the factor that if you were in World War II and you were in Dresden or something, mission factor, right? And that makes them even scarier. And if you lived well past that war era and you look at what happened at Chernobyl's the best example, it's like, holy cow, when the nuke stuff gets out of control and the genie's out of the bottle, you got problems that are lasting for generations. So I think that's what's more frightening about that. People have some, in my opinion, irrational fears about even nuclear power, not weaponry, like reactors. Like, well, they could just blow up. Well, nuclear reactors can't blow up with a nuclear explosion because I did go to nuke school. As I said, I can tell you, don't have the facilities there to create a nuclear explosion. But if you blow one up and it's dirty enough, like Chernobyl, yeah, it's a mess. So I think people are, it's not unjustifiable to be concerned about that because it's worse than your house catching on fire. It's worse than a grenade going off in your shed. It's got more long-term threats and a lot of stuff that people don't really comprehend, because if you don't go to school and study it, it's like, oh, nuclear radiation, nuclear poisoning. And I'm not dismissing it, but it's a scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody comes into your neighborhood with a grenade, if you don't get killed by the grenade when it goes off, you're in pretty good shape. Mm-hmm. So I guess my answer to you is fear of the unknown, but a justifiable fear of the unknown.
Yeah. Do you think, I know you're not a nuclear expert, but do you think if there was a nuclear exchange in the world today, that the world would survive, or would it create a catastrophic domino effect that could potentially collapse the entire world economy and just end civilization as we know it? Or is a nuclear exchange, is there enough, like, say for instance, the Saturday night show, I was talking with a friend of mine who lives in Taiwan, and he knows about the region there in Asia. So we were talking about Pakistan and India and the tensions between them and the possibility of a nuclear exchange. So if those guys launch their nukes at each other, more than likely they're going to go all out, mutually assured destruction. But I think, I'll give you my opinion after you give me your opinion. But do you think that there would be the possibility of an all-out nuclear war in today's, climate?
No, I don't. You ask a question that's complicated like that, and normally you expect a really long, nuanced answer. I'll give you a one-word answer. No. And here's why. If you're going to start a war like that, there's two scenarios that I can think of. One is that you actually want to win and take out somebody else, but you want a world left over to be able to own and dominate and make use of. And a huge exchange between the There's actually 28 countries that have at least one nuclear weapon, which is not a widely known thing. South Africa has a few, by the way. Not many people know that, you know. But a massive exchange, for example, between Russia and the United States, that would decimate the North American continent, a good part of Eastern Europe and Asia. But, and don't get me wrong, it would pollute all sorts of stuff. But would it take out enough people? Probably not. And do I think anybody's going to go with the first strike in that scenario? No, I don't, because I do believe in mutually assured destruction. I absolutely do. And even if the Russians think they have the heads up on us and they can get a first launch off, both countries have a bunch of boomers, submarines with nuclear launch capabilities, constantly around the world, deep down. And if they lose contact with their home country for more than 12 hours or something, their default order is to pop to the surface and launch at the other side. And that's mutually assured destruction.
I agree.
And I don't think anybody's going to do it. I'm far more worried that somebody like Iran, North Korea might pop off one or two. Don't get me wrong, that'd be terrible. Wherever it hits, if it's on a landmass in a populated area, horrible. It doesn't take out humanity. I think there are so many other things that are going to take out humanity, and I don't think humanity is in any way assured. By the way, I have a top 5 list of things where I think we're going to take ourselves out. Nuclear war doesn't even make the top 5.
We'll have to have another show and talk about that because that does sound interesting to me, and I want to hear that. But Star Alley mentioned that she lives a stone's throw from Nellis Air Force Base, which is very close to where I live as well. And word has it that they may have a nuclear bomb magazine full of. And I think she might be right. I know at one time there absolutely was nuclear weapons stored out there, but are they still there? That's unknown. The problem with the nuclear arsenal of today is that it's getting older, it's aging, and the fact that we have nuclear weapons at all could lead to an accident. It has led to nuclear accidents in the past. It's going to lead to nuclear accidents in the future. Fortunately, we've averted nuclear war because of an accident, but people are dying, or people have died because of nuclear accidents in the
Sure.
past, and will happen in the future as long as we have nuclear weapons. Do you think that the nuclear mutually assured destruction is primarily responsible for not having a new third world war for the last 50, 60 years? Or
Yeah.
actually, it's going on 70 years now.
Yeah, I do. There was a saying, and for people who grew up in my era, I apologize because I wasn't prepared for this question, but anybody can go Google it. Someone relatively famous said, I don't know what the Third World War will look like,
Einstein said
but
that.
the Fourth World War will be fought with sticks and stones
Yep. And it's true.
because the Third World War is going to take out everybody.
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain sense of rationality and common sense to that. So, yeah, I'm not somebody that blames mutual assured destruction as being a bad thing. I think it has kept us from going to the brink. And unless somebody has a major breakthrough, and this could tie into the whole UAP discussion and the technology being observed with that, unless somebody makes a huge breakaway to get ahead of everybody else by so far that you aren't going to be able to respond, then everybody is still kind of waiting and going, we can have limited war. And we've had a war in Afghanistan for what, 20 years?
Hmm.
How long were we in Iraq? We have other countries that are fighting back and forth right now. Hamas and Israel going at it again. We're a warlike species. That's our entire history. But another world war gets more dangerous once you have nukes
Definitely.
and anything else we might have that we don't know about yet. where you could really just wipe everybody out. And I'm convinced that some of these powerful weapons, as frightening as they are, and as many issues as we have with them, justifiably, they have stopped us from wiping ourselves out through war. We have lots of other ways to wipe ourselves out.
I
Artificial
totally agree with that.
intelligence, genetic engineering, a comet coming in. Um, there's. I see you laughing. I'm not. That's not a joke. I'm serious about every one of
I'm
those.
laughing because I agree with your assessment of mutually assured destruction. I think it has averted world war
I think it
for
holds it off because
for this whole period.
a lot of people want to fight, but everybody wants to win the fight and have something left to take as spoils after you win.
Yeah. Or
And
otherwise,
nuclear
what's the point?
weapons make it
What's the point of
unlikely
it?
you get to do that. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and that's all this is, man. But you did mention the UAP topic, and I'm getting a lot of questions in the chat about UAP. So let's dive into that. Before we get
Okay.
to the chat questions, I know that you had some experience. I have never heard the details of it, but would you really quickly share the details of your experience, and or has it been multiple experiences?
About UAP,
Yeah.
personal experiences.
Yes.
I've been interested my whole life. I had no experiences since I was a young man reading science fiction books and all of that. Over the years, there's a few occasions where I saw some weird lights that might have been something odd, but they might have been Japanese lanterns or just something I didn't know what I was seeing until November of last year. November of last year, my wife and I had two experiences. They happened in a space of 1 week. After all of that time, never seeing anything, I went out one evening and I filmed both of them. Maybe later we can put it in the chat. I have some videos on my YouTube channel that nobody looks at. We filmed I filmed one, my wife filmed the other, and we saw both of them. And yeah, I saw something really weird last November, and a few days later in the same week, my wife was walking the dog. I was out on our back deck, not very far away, and we had something go right over our house. And it was late at night. It's cell phone video, so of course it's crap. You can look at it and go, oh, that could be anything. Absolutely, but if you saw it with your bare eyes, you saw there was something triangular shaped that had these weird dots of light that were changing color and jumping back and forth right around. Went right over our house. The other one was further away across the valley from us, but it also had these weird color changes and stuff. Those are the only two times. I've never seen anything else. And we did not see any aliens. There's nobody that dropped down and landed. I didn't see ET or anything. That's the
Would
closest
you
we came.
Would you consider that, because a lot of people that have seen similar type of craft consider that a life-changing event, like a paradigm shifting event in their life? Would you consider it such for your experience?
No, because I already, God, I hate using this word, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. I was already a believer. Man, I I don't want to treat it like a religion, but for a very long time, I've always just thought the idea that we were the only ones in a universe, in a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars, in a universe of trillions of galaxies, with planets everywhere we look now that we're looking, you know. But even before we knew about that, it was like it just seems implausible we're the only place where a couple of cells hooked together and said, "Oh, we should be life." And it's I've long felt that one of my first big turning points was when the crew on the International Space Station went and found a smudge on their window and tried to clean it off. And they realized it was on the outside. And it was a fungus living in the vacuum of space. And they had to send out a spacewalker to clean it off. For me, that was a big wake-up moment because I
Life
was
could
like,
survive in
wait a
space.
minute, there's something living in the vacuum of space being blasted by the radiation of the sun 12 hours a day, and it somehow survived. At that point, I was like, you know what? Life is probably ubiquitous. The galaxy is probably just lousy with life if you can live there. And if you can have multicellular life living in the vacuum of space on the outside of the space station, all the planets we're finding, it's like virtually every star we look at now that we have the technology has some planets that are in what we consider the habitable zone. What are the odds that it didn't start anywhere else? And then if you've got this many planets with that possibility, and you're talking trillions upon trillions, if it happened here, what are the odds it never happened anywhere else? So yeah, I've always kind of been a believer, and it's been reinforced in the recent couple of decades a lot, that there's other intelligent life out there
Does it surprise
somewhere.
you? Does it surprise you that there are still people on this planet that do not believe in that? That there are still people who think that this is the only place that life exists? Does it
Not at
surprise
all.
you?
Not at all. And you can't prove them wrong. We have no evidence of any actual life, even in our own solar system. We think we're going to find it on Mars, on some of the watery moons, on the gas giants. It certainly seems likely, but we haven't proved that yet. For all we know, and I will say to everybody out there shaking your head and going, you don't know that. You're right. I don't know that. This may have been the only genesis. There may not be any life anywhere else. The stuff that was growing on the space station almost certainly came from Earth, came up with the astronauts. We don't know it, but it strikes me as highly improbable. And, I think, as I said, I think the universe is lousy with life. Has it been proven yet? No, but I think we're getting close.
Yeah.
And as we explore what the heck these things flying around in our airspace are, if they're not ours, then they're not the Russians or the Chinese or the Iranians or the North Koreans. That's probably going to raise more questions for people like, okay, well, who made it then? My theory, maybe the dolphins, which means maybe only one Genesis. But
So in seriousness, I like that theory or that joking theory that you like to talk about. But there was a point in time where you went from, or was there a point in time where you went from skeptic to believer? And like you said, I hate that term too, but that's really the best term for it because unless you've seen something like that they exist now, you don't know what they are, but you know that they exist because you've seen them. Until that point, would you ever consider yourself a skeptic? Like people seeing UFOs are either making it up, they're probably crazy, or they're just doing it for attention.
I'm still a skeptic. I think everybody has to be at least a little bit a skeptic. We need data. We need proof. I'm not willing to sign on and say, "Oh, I know for sure it's dolphins."
Oh, but I mean,
I know for sure
and
it's coming from Zeta Reticuli.
well,
It
let
could
me
still
rephrase
be
the
the
question.
Russians.
Let me rephrase the question a little bit because what I was getting at is there have been people who witnessed these phenomena, for a long time, as I guess going back to the beginning of history. But until you saw something, did you believe that these people were actually seeing something, or did you think that they were seeing hallucinations or making it stuff up?
I don't know how to
Or
answer that. I really don't, Andrew. I mean, I never, I don't remember ever a time when I felt like I would say, oh, well, you're lying. You have to be lying. That has to be wrong. But at the same time, until not very long ago, I was like, well, the possibility exists. This could be totally misinterpretations, you know, and some people making things up, certainly. So, no, I honestly, I don't remember a time where I made that transition in unless it was somewhere between 2017 and now. I'm a lot more of a believer now, but I still could be entirely wrong.
Definitely. So we'll go to some chat questions real quick because we got about 15 minutes left before you got to bounce. Scott Brown says, "Can you? What do you think of the 1945 case, which Jacques Vallée's new book is based on?" And I think that's the
Oh, yeah,
Trinity case.
it's the Trinity case. I've never been a fan of the Trinity case. I nobody can say for sure, but there were a lot of questions raised about there was two primary witnesses who were children at the time. I don't know if Jacques Vallée and his co-author have come out with new information we haven't seen. They may have, but a lot of people have done deep dives on the two primary witnesses who were children at the time. And I'm not saying children can't give good testimony. They certainly can, tons of cases we've studied. But I've always found the Trinity case sketchy. Um, can I say definitively it didn't happen? No, I can't. Anything's possible. I mean, if you want to believe in the Rendlesham case, if uh, there's several others where there was supposedly recovery of materials and things like that, but that one happened in an era where I won't even waste the whole rest of the show. I will just answer your question and say I'm not a big believer in the Trinity case. I I think there are aspects of it that allow for skepticism. I can't rule it out entirely, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of Trinity.
I'll read the book because I don't know about that case at all. I'm hoping that there is compelling evidence or testimony in the book, um, but I don't know about it. So Shawnee 002, interested in Jazz's view of the politics within current UFO discourse. Witnessed a lot of leftists this evening dismissing disclosure because Rubio is involved. That's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Oh, I
Also
have.
dismissing Will is on it. Really? Why would they do that? What's the point of that?
Well, because for those of you who are coming into this conversation from UFO world, you have seen endless fights between people. People that do or don't believe in Jeremy Corbell, and people who do or don't believe in this case or that case, and they always find reasons to fight. I've gotten dragged into them. If you're not somebody coming from a world of politics, you probably don't realize that American politics, particularly for those of you in other countries, American politics is 1,000 times worse than the UFO community. It's 1,000 times worse. It's toxic. It's a garbage dump. And I say that as somebody who gets paid to work for a living in that garbage dump. Okay? It's way worse. So, yeah, of course, there's going to be arguments. If it was just a case of Marco Rubio saying, I've received these briefings, and this is now what I believe, and we have to do this, then yeah, there's going to be half the country that's going to go, oh, well, this is full of crap because you're a Republican. Ron Wyden, a Democrat from the Pacific Northwest, um, was one of the people who signed on with Rubio to get this request in for the report. It was a bipartisan commission that approved the report back in December. Half Republicans, half Democrats. The only person who objected not because he didn't want the information, but because he didn't like one of the budget items that was involved. It was a bipartisan thing. So, no, I think there's definitely room in American politics for us to have this discussion and to have a bipartisan approach to try to ask the government to provide this information. I work on a daily basis with people who are so fundamentally opposed to whatever my political beliefs are. Ryan Sprague, Somewhere in the Skies. I'm obviously considered one of the conservatives in the circuit. Ryan Sprague is one of the most liberal guys you're ever going to meet. If you asked us to go down a checklist of things that we agreed on whatever the hell is being debated in Congress today, we probably wouldn't agree on more than 30%. And yet, when we talk about ufology, we're on the same page, and we manage to not fight with each other. And we go ahead and have adult, polite conversations. And I think there's room for that for everybody. Have I run into people who, because they know me from my background in covering politics, who turn around and go, "Oh, well, we can't talk to you about UFOs," and just block you out? Yeah, I've hit several of those, but not that many, really. I mean, it's a bipartisan issue. It really is.
It is, and there's room outside of the UFO conversation. Just from my point of view, my perspective, what you're saying is absolutely right, and be that should be taken in account for other issues as well. I mean, you can be friends with somebody who disagrees with you politically. Just don't talk about politics. You can talk about other things, right? If you might be on a softball team with somebody, or you're out hiking with a friend of yours. If you guys talk about politics, you might get into a fist fight. Just don't talk about it, right? You can disagree, but still be friends with that person. And that's the thing I don't get is why people, not just friends, but also family members, are not talking to each other because they disagree so
That's
disparately.
the end extreme, Andrew. And
Yeah,
a lot of people probably don't realize that unless they follow me closely on social media and know my entire circle. I am married to a liberal, feminist, Democrat, Bernie Sanders supporter. Okay, who attended an all girls college and tweets constantly about stuff like that. We've been married for more than a quarter of a century. We're extremely happy together. We don't have to agree on everything.
true.
And if we can manage that 24/7 in each other's faces, if you have engagements with people on Facebook, on Twitter, on things like that, talking about UFOs, do you really have to send everybody down into the gulag if they disagree with you about what the fines should be for a traffic ticket? Really, let's learn to get along. Seriously.
Absolutely.
We all
Absolutely.
have one common goal here: UFO disclosure. No matter what the answer is, focus on that. And if you want to be little piss ants and just say, well, if you disagree with me about the color of the t-shirt you're going to wear, then we can't be friends and we can't talk and we can't work together. I really have no interest in you.
Okay,
So,
let's wrap that up, and because I wanted to ask you real quick. I spent after the evening, all last evening, watching Grant Cameron's channel because he had a panel of people that included Danny Sheehan, and Danny Sheehan came on there and was talking about Lou Elizondo was the person responsible for the IG report. That was revelatory to me. Um, and I haven't gotten anybody's thoughts that in the circles that I run with on the 60 Minutes report. But real quick, if you could tell me in 5 minutes or less, so I could give you time to do some final thoughts. The UAPTF findings report that's coming out, supposedly coming out in June, the IG investigation, and the 60 Minutes report. In a nutshell, what are your thoughts on those three?
um, I won't say Lou Elizondo was the author of the idea. I think he played a huge role in getting us to the point where the report was being requested. I think he got a lot more congressional attention so that the Senate Select Intelligence Committee would request the report. I think he's also moved the bar in how much wiggle room the Pentagon has in responding to it. The IG investigation is a whole other subject, and we would need a whole another show to talk about that. We don't know yet, and the people who broke the news about the IG report work for the same outlet, one of the outlets I write for, the Debrief. You know, it's another area, and I know your listeners are gonna get sick of hearing this. We don't know, but we do know that the Investigator General's offices in each of the branches of the government, they don't generally launch things on their own. They respond to inquiries. And this was not launched as an investigation, which they do. It's an evaluation. Someone raised an issue, probably multiple people in the government raised an issue to the IG's office. What was the issue they raised? On one hand, you can say that, oh, Senator Rand Paul said that's a waste of money to be chasing UFOs. And one of the jobs of the IG is to look for waste, fraud, and abuse. Another school of thought says that people in the Senate Armed Forces community were saying that this is an important topic, but it looks like you guys don't have the first clue what the frick you're saying or what you're doing. Are you being efficient? And the IG also looks into efficiency to make sure the taxpayers' money is being spent efficiently. So the point is, those are the two ends of the spectrum for me. And anybody who tells you they know the absolute answer who isn't working in the IG office is probably somebody you should back away from. But these are both possibilities, and there are other possibilities across the spectrum in between those. I don't think that the IG office has any interest in, like, we have to make sure there's disclosure and we want to know about aliens. That's not the IG office's job.
Well, I would encourage you to check out that that panel discussion on Grant Cameron's channel. It's 2 hours long, but if you fast forward to about the just cut out the first half hour, 45 minutes of it, when Daniel Sheehan comes in there, because Daniel Sheehan said that he is representing Lou Elizondo, and Lou Elizondo is the complainant that filed the complaint with the IG, and they're looking into it for a couple of reasons. One of them is the DOD's claims that he didn't work for ATIP. So that was Danny Sheehan, and I don't really know that much about him, but I do know he's a lawyer, and he's been involved in the disclosure movement for decades.
Wow, that would be an unusual thing to launch an entire evaluation on.
There's more to it. There's more to it. I'm
particularly when
paraphrasing.
Harry Reid has already come out and said they're lying, that he was in charge of it.
Yeah.
I'm more inclined to think that it's either a complaint about spending or a complaint that they're not doing a good enough job.
Well, you're a
what you just
journalist. Why
laid
don't
out
you?
to me,
Why don't,
I'm not denying it. Just
no,
to be clear,
or you could go directly to Danny Sheehan. He'll probably respond to you. Ask him, if he could expound on
I'd
that.
be happy to. I mean, if he wants to talk about it, I'll do it. But that sounds like the least likely or least plausible premise that I've heard. I can't imagine, because I've worked in and with the government for a long time, any inspector general's office to go and launch an entire evaluation of the entire Pentagon based on somebody saying, well, this guy said I didn't work there, but I did. I'm sorry, I'm not going to say 100% impossible, but that does not sound plausible.
So I think I took it a little bit out of context, because Danny said that was an add-on, like an attachment to the investigation, the evaluation.
Could be an add-on, sure.
So maybe I was misquoting what Danny said, but check with him, man, because he might have shed some light on something that would be interesting to find out. I certainly would like to know more, but I don't think Danny Sheehan's gonna take my phone call. or respond to my email. I mean, he might, but I don't know.
Now
So
we're gonna find out what the IG is up to, but it's gonna take time.
yeah,
They're not doing an investigation, and they have very clear labels about the difference between investigations and evaluations. So they're not looking for, initially at least, signs of wrongdoing, signs of fraud, waste, and abuse. They're doing an evaluation, which is their other main branch of the IG's job, which is to look for efficiency and waste. You know, um, is this a productive use of people's time? Is it a productive use of the taxpayers' money? Things like that. Uh, that's my expectation. Maybe I'll turn out to be totally wrong. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's Lou Elizondo is pissed off, you know, but that doesn't strike me as likely.
no,
So
there is more to it. It's not just about Lou um, getting the shaft by the DoD. There's a lot more to it. I'm just saying that Danny Sheehan is in the middle of it. He might have some answers. So, if you give me just a couple more minutes, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people how to get in contact with you if they're interested. But I wanted to get your take on the 60 Minutes as a journalist and a person who's been interested in this topic, who could possibly be thrown into the mix of UFO community or a ufologist. How do you feel about the 60 Minutes report? Was it,
thought it was great.
it
I
was
have
great?
no complaints whatsoever. Um, if you are someone who has been following this topic closely and just dredging out all the details, on a day-to-day basis, like you and I, a lot of other people, was there anything really revelatory or groundbreaking, opening up disclosure in the 60 Minutes report? No, there was not. But we had prepared ourselves for that. Um, that report was not for us. That report was for the normies. That was to get people who weren't generally following this all the time, were getting their news elsewhere, not paying attention, to look at a trusted news source that talks about conventional things all the time and go, huh, wow, that's weird. What's going on here? And it worked. The water cooler conversation changed this morning tremendously. I
Definitely.
was getting hammered in social media. So many people I've talked to, journalists I know at CNN, other places, are all like, holy cow, what just happened? You know, and people are asking questions. I'm going to borrow, I know everybody's not a Jeremy Corbell fan. I've had my issues with him, but that show weaponized people's curiosity.
Yeah, yeah. I actually dig that phrase, man. I know that Jeremy Corbell catches a lot of flack for some of his tactics.
And
I,
and
I,
rightfully
I,
so sometimes.
I like the work he's doing. I think that he's a master at hype, using hype to promote his work. But you cannot take away the fact that this guy has come out with some stuff that nobody else has brought to the public. And
Right?
it seems to me like, I don't know who I asked this to. I don't know if you were in the group, but on Luis's show the other day, I asked a question. Um, if the DoD wanted to release this kind of information to the public, would they do it themselves through their own PR firm, or would they do it through a channel like Jeremy Corbell or TTSA?
No, I wasn't in for that, and my answer would be absolutely not, just from my background in the government and the
Okay.
military. I do believe that they would, what's the best way to phrase this? They would channel the information and pick the outlets that they gave the best stuff to so that it played out in a way that worked to their best benefit. I don't think they would just be picking a player who could go and rat them out later.
Hmm.
Um, but they would definitely, Susan Goff, for people who don't know, everybody calls her Susan Goff. It's Colonel Goff. She's a retired military intelligence specialist. She wrote what literally was the book and still is the book. It's in use right now. She was the author of the book the military uses on controlling the flow of information and public opinion. I have links to it on my Twitter channel. Go ahead and look at it. It's still out there. They pulled her out of retirement to take this job. She's not some random person that was picked out as a spokesman for somebody else and got a raise from GS 12 to GS 13. She's a retirement military information specialist, and she was placed in charge as the only person to talk to journalists about the UAP topic for a reason. And you can go see that paper yourself. It's still online today.
I've read it. I've
Oh,
read part of it. I've
it
read part of
is.
it. It's a good paper.
It's a good
It's a
paper,
very interesting
and
paper.
that's
She was
why
a smart
she's in
woman.
that job.
Yep.
And nobody should be confused for a moment like she's just, oh, well, I'm a secretary who got asked to answer
Not
questions.
at all. Not at all.
No,
Real quick, I just
no.
want to say, for the people in the chat, if you guys want to come on the live stream and converse with me, Jazz is going to be leaving here in a minute,
Yep.
but you guys are welcome to use that link. It'll drop you into the waiting room. Once Jazz leaves the show, then I'll let you guys come in and say what's on your mind, because I'd like to hear what people are thinking about the three things I asked Jazz about: the UAPTF findings report, the IG evaluation. Thanks for correcting me on that, Jazz. And your thoughts on the 60 Minutes from last night.
And the Cold War.
Well, I appreciate you talking about the Cold War. That there is so much more we could talk about. I
Dude,
just
we got to do this again. You
I
and
would
I
love
have to get
to.
together and do this again.
I would absolutely love to. Anytime, Jazz. You're welcome to come on the show anytime. I know you're a busy dude. For a retired dude, you're probably one of the busiest writers that I know, as far as a person writing
I'm
for a
not
publication.
technically retired. I'm of retirement age, but I have a wife and a house and all that shit that I have to pay for. So, pardon my swearing. Sorry, guys.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to give you an opportunity to say some final thoughts, and also let people know how they can get in touch with you if they want to follow your work, or reach out to you and contact you.
Well, like I said, I think we covered everything here. I'm not a believer. I'm I'm a believer as much as anybody in terms of my own beliefs, but I don't think I know any of the answers when it comes to the UAP topic. I do not for a moment believe that I've got it all figured out. I have heavy skepticism about anybody who tells me, "Oh, I'm on the inside and I've got it all figured out. I have all the answers." Those are the people I run away from the most quickly. You know, I think we're all in this boat together. I think there's been tremendous progress made recently, and I hope we all continue to apply pressure upwards. And I don't know how much information there even is available for us to get, but I think we should get what is available that doesn't endanger us in terms of national security. So that's my goal. That's my job. If anybody wants to stay in touch with me, I work for Salem Media. You can go to Hot Air if you care about whatever bullshit I'm talking about in politics. I write for the Debrief with Micah Hanks and MJ Benias and Tim McMillan and several other people. You can find me there. You can go on Twitter and find me at Jazz Shaw. And believe me, a lot of it's going to be boring. But hey, if you want to check it out, feel free. And thank you for having me, sir.
Hey, very much appreciate you being here. You did have a excellent article on ball lightning that just dropped on the
I love
debrief.
that one.
I
I
recommend
spent a
everybody go
week
check that one out.
researching that.
Yeah, definitely. Please read that. And I gave people a little preview of what our conversation would look like, Jazz. And it was a question I asked you. Have you ever seen UFOs? And your answer was,
Yes.
and
And they're inhabited by dolphins.
now let's talk about nukes, man. That was the preview. So I wanted to run that past you.
I appreciate it, man.
No, I appreciate you being here, Jazz. You're
I had a great
awesome.
time.
I had a great time too. So You be safe. Tell your wife thanks for letting you hang out with me.
Yep, she's watching right now, so I'm going to hear about it as soon as I get off. So.
Oh, right on. Cool. Well, thank you for watching, Mrs. Shaw. Mrs. Shaw, right?
Close enough.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, nobody's dropping into the live stream, so I guess I'm going to end it. Everybody there, have a good night. Jazz, have a great night, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Talk to you again.
Take care.